Hey everybody, what does American Primeval get right and wrong about the darkest chapter in Mormon history? Netflix hit new Western series is dramatic, bloody, and relentless. Oh, and I'm D-Baze, the host of the Mormon Movie Reviews, and that's talent on loan from Kolob. 6 dark-toned episodes of American Primeval, an expensive-looking Western created by Mark Smith, the screenwriter for the Oscar-winning film The Revenant, are now sitting in the #1 spot on Netflix. This limited series unites for the 5th time Friday Night Lights' Peter Berg and Taylor Kitsch for a story about the struggle for control in what is now Utah and southern Wyoming right before the Civil War. Like many other past and recent entries in the genre, American Primeval is full of blood, guns, and death. The creators aimed for a singularly grim aesthetic, so much so that the show's sound designer, interviewed about the project in the New York Times, mentioned that Berg had him remove all bird sound from the mix. In promoting the show, Netflix argues that the series has a lesson that makes it stand out among entertainment sets in the American West. Namely, that the American West was a mess. And sure enough, everyone in the show is surrounded by murder, rape, and all manner of abuse. There's a lot of story here, maybe too much, all loosely set during the events of the Utah War of 1857 and 1858, also known as the Mormon War. This was a conflict between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the federal government. Betty Gilpin's straight-laced Victorian lady Sarah is headed west, with her tween son, played by Preston Moda, in tow. Kitsch's Isaac was raised among the Shoshone tribe, who has been grieving alone in the bush after his wife and their child were killed, reluctantly agrees to guide Sarah across the Wasatch Mountains. The three are joined by a Shoshone girl, Shawnee Poyer, and pursued by a bounty hunter, Jay Courtney, who's out for Sarah, dead or alive. This little ad hoc family's struggle across the landscape would probably be enough story for some, but American Primeval is full of a lot of people who want a lot of things. We also get the quest of Mormon immigrant Jacob Pratt, played by Dane DeHaan, to find his wife Abish, played by Sarah Lightfoot Leon, who's been separated from him by violence. The war words that famous frontiersman Jim Bridger, played by Shea Wigman, has with LDS leader Brigham Young, played by Kim Coates, who wants to buy Bridger's fort and trading post in order to protect Mormon sovereignty over the territory. Plus, we've got the despair of the idealistic U.S. Army captain, played by Lucas Neff, who tries and fails to keep the violence in check. And let's not forget the conflict between warrior Redfeather, played by Derek Hinkey, and his mother, a Shoshone chief who only wants peace. That's right, there's a lot of storylines here, and some may seem familiar to consumers of lots of stories set in the American West. There was both an abused woman escaping punishment via the frontier and a young warrior arguing with a peaceful tribal elder in Kevin Costner's Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1, for example. And there's also plot tricks. A white man is scalped but survives, and a canteen with a spiral scratched onto it travels across the landscape and tells a tale when people can't. These seem like obvious nods to The Revenant, which most people agree is more entertaining and perhaps even more accurate. Weirdly enough, given the many individual moments of violence in the show, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, a fictionalized version which sets the major events of the plot in motion and which accounts for many of the casualties historians assign to the Utah War, gets toned down in comparison to the historical record. In real life, the Baker-Fancher wagon train, about 40 separate families mostly originating in Arkansas and headed to California, spent 5 days after the beginning of the September 1857 attack that led to the massacre, with their wagons drawn in a defensive position, pinned down by a group of Mormon militiamen and Paiute people, and suffering from a lack of water, food, and ammunition. The massacre itself occurred on September 11th, after a small group of Mormons approached the wagon train bearing a white flag and offered the immigrants safe escort away from the Native American attackers if they would leave behind their belongings as appeasement. The travelers took them up on this offer and began walking, and then their escorts turned on them, killing them all, except 17 children ages 6 and under, whose testimony the attackers thought wouldn't be believed. These children were placed in Mormon homes and only reunited with their relatives a few years later after the U.S. Army undertook a search to find them. That massacre and its aftermath would make a good subject for a longer treatment, but making that project would be a dicey choice given the politics around the history, and also nobody would want to watch the results because it would be absolutely horrific. Now, of course, the 2007 movie September Dawn with Jon Voight tried this but was awful for different reasons. While in the 2022 miniseries Under the Banner of Heaven, the massacre is a B-plot in the finale. Berg and Smith try to solve the problem by diluting the massacre's violence and spreading it around across plot lines until it seems to be everywhere. In their version, instead of being drawn out over days of a siege, the attack comes quickly out of the blue, with one female immigrant cut off in the middle of small talk by an arrow to the forehead. Yes, we see many people dying and it's intense. But because we're not following the point of view of Sarah, who escapes, we don't spend that much time in the scene itself. And you don't see all those older than 6 immigrant kids getting killed. Well, you do see one die. The Mormon who kills the little boy immediately rips off his hood and throws up. In the snow, the Mormon attackers let a group of women live and give them to their Native American collaborators as captives. But historically, no women were allowed to escape the violence. In Netflix publicity materials, Smith gives some clues as to why the show softens the massacre.
We wanted to make sure that we also showed both sides of the attack. It was driven by the Nauvoo Legion, by the Mormon militia, factually, but we have to understand that they perceived the immigrants as a threat.
To that end, Smith has Coates Brigham Young speak actual words drawn from the historical record. Headlines about the horrific anti-Mormon violence that drove the church members west float across the screen, and the script throws in many negative encounters between the Latter-day Saints and other white settlers, who needle the Saints about polygamy and threaten them with murder. Smith also adds a small party of Mormon immigrants to the Baker Fancher train, including the married Pratt couple, who are sympathetic point-of-view characters. But this being American Primeval, it doesn't end well. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with smushing history together and recombining it to make drama better, and it is great to see religious conflict incorporated into a story about the American West. This history, even in other plot-heavy epics like Horizon and American Saga, tends to get flattened out into a settlers versus Native American scenario. But the cosmology of American Primeval, a relentless and absolutely humorless television series, apart from a few one-liners from Jim Bridger, sees violence as a floating plague, a random affliction that visits each group in turn, an inevitable thing that cannot be controlled rather than something with an infinitely variable relationship to human agency. Television has its needs, and Primeval can't be blamed for trying to distinguish itself in a genre that's increasingly crowded with Taylor Sheridan shows alone. But the show's fundamental premise, the West was violent, is not as new an idea as this show's makers seem to think.